The mahogany conference table felt cold beneath my trembling hands as I sat surrounded by my late husband's family. The law office smelled of old leather and expensive cologne, the kind Robert used to wear when he wanted to intimidate someone. His brother Marcus sat directly across from me, his steel-gray eyes boring into mine with undisguised contempt. His wife Jennifer whispered something to their daughter Sarah, who shot me a look that could have frozen hell itself. I adjusted my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to Robert's funeral 3 days ago. It felt strange being here without him, listening to his lawyer, Mr. Hutchinson, shuffle through papers with the efficiency of a man who'd done this dance 1,000 times before. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across everyone's faces. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Hutchinson began, his voice carrying that practiced solemnity lawyers perfect over decades. "We're here today for the reading of Robert Michael Harrison's last will and testament, dated March 15, 2023. My heart hammered against my ribs. Robert had been secretive about his will, always saying we'd discuss it later, whenever I brought it up. After 15 years of marriage, I'd learned not to push him on certain subjects. He had his ways of shutting down conversations he didn't want to have. Marcus leaned forward, his expensive suit rustling. "Let's get this over with, shall we? Some of us have real jobs to get back to." His tone dripped with the same condescension Robert used to use when talking about my part-time job at the local library, as if my contribution to our household meant nothing. Mr. Hutchinson cleared his throat and began reading. "To my beloved brother Marcus Harrison, I leave my share of Harrison Electronics, valued at approximately $2.8 million. Marcus's face lit up with satisfaction. "To my niece Sarah Harrison, I leave my classic car collection and the sum of $500,000 for her college education." The words felt like physical blows. I watched as Robert's family exchanged pleased glances, their relief palpable. They'd always treated me like an outsider, the librarian who'd somehow trapped their golden boy into marriage. Now they were getting what they'd always believed was rightfully theirs. "To my wife, Catherine Harrison," Mr. Hutchinson continued, and the room fell silent. I held my breath, waiting for Robert's final gesture of love after 15 years together. "I leave the sum of $50,000 and wish her well in her future endeavors." The silence that followed was deafening. $50,000. After 15 years of marriage, of supporting his dreams, of standing by him through his father's death, his business struggles, his dark moods, $50,000. Marcus couldn't contain his smirk. "Well, Catherine, I suppose that's more than fair, considering you brought nothing to the marriage." His words stung because they echoed what Robert's family had whispered behind my back for years, that I was a gold digger, that I'd married above my station. Jennifer's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table. "Robert was always too generous. 50,000 is quite charitable, really." Her voice carried that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in my cheeks. The same feeling I'd experienced at every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every time they'd made it clear I didn't belong. But this time was different. This time, Robert wasn't here to play peacekeeper, to smooth things over with his easy charm. "Is there anything else, Mr. Hutchinson?" Sarah asked, already calculating her windfall in her head. At 22, she'd never worked a day in her life, funded entirely by her uncle's generosity. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, glancing between his papers and the expectant faces around the table. "Actually, there is one more document that pertains to this estate." He reached into a different folder, one I hadn't noticed before. "A prenuptial agreement between Robert and Catherine Harrison, signed on June 10, 2008. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus straightened in his chair, his confident smirk faltering. "What prenuptial agreement? Robert never mentioned any prenup." Mr. Hutchinson's eyes found mine across the table, and I saw something there. Was it respect? "Mrs. Harrison, I believe you have something to add to these proceedings?" For the first time since entering that suffocating room, I smiled. The prenuptial agreement lay between us like a loaded gun. Marcus's face had gone from satisfied to suspicious in the span of a heartbeat. Jennifer's perfectly composed mask slipped, revealing the calculating woman beneath. Sarah just looked confused, her young mind trying to process what a prenup might mean for her inheritance. "Catherine," Marcus said slowly, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years, Surely you don't think some old paperwork is going to change anything here. Robert's will is clear. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying since the funeral. My hands were steadier now, the initial shock of Robert's betrayal crystallizing into something harder, more determined. Oh, Marcus, you're absolutely right. Robert's will is very clear, but so is our prenuptial agreement. The truth was, I'd spent the last 3 days in my own lawyer's office, going over every word of that document with a fine-tooth comb. Robert thought he was being clever, trying to leave me with table scraps while his family inherited the empire we'd built together. What he hadn't counted on was my memory being better than his. Let me tell you all a little story, I said, settling back in my chair, about how your beloved Robert tried to outsmart a librarian. Mr. Hutchinson opened the prenup with careful precision. The document is quite comprehensive, actually. Shall I read the relevant sections? Marcus slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Robert would have told us if there was a prenup. We advised him against marrying you in the first place. He would have protected himself properly if he'd listened. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were right. They had advised against our marriage. I'd overheard Jennifer telling Robert's mother that I was obvious in my intentions and that someone of his caliber could do so much better. His mother had agreed, suggesting he find someone more suitable to his station. Actually, Marcus, I said, my voice gaining strength, Robert did protect himself, just not in the way you think. I nodded to Mr. Hutchinson. Please, read Section 12. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Section 12 states, in the event of Robert Harrison's death, should his will attempt to disinherit or substantially diminish Catherine Harrison's marital rights, this prenuptial agreement shall supersede any such provisions, and the standard community property laws of the state shall apply. Jennifer's face went white. What does that mean exactly? I'd been married to Robert for 15 years. I'd watched him build Harrison Electronics from a struggling startup into a multi-million-dollar company. I'd been there for the late nights, the failed deals, the moments when he'd wanted to give up. I'd also been there when his father died and left him the seed money that really launched the business. What his family never knew was that Robert's father had called me the week before he passed. It means, I said, looking directly at Marcus, that Robert can't give away what isn't entirely his to give. The old man's voice echoed in my memory. Catherine, dear, you make my son happy in a way I've never seen. I want you to know that you'll always be taken care of. I've made sure of that. Robert's father had been the one to insist on the prenup, but not for the reasons everyone assumed. He'd seen how his family treated me, heard the whispers, watched the way they excluded me from business discussions despite my MBA in finance, the degree I'd earned while working full-time to support Robert through his master's program. You see, I continued, Robert's father was a very smart man. He knew his family's true nature better than anyone. The prenup wasn't designed to protect Robert from me. It was designed to protect me from all of you. Sarah finally found her voice. That's impossible. Uncle Robert owned Harrison Electronics. He built it himself. I almost felt sorry for her naivety. Sarah, honey, your uncle built the company, yes. But he built it with his father's money during our marriage, using joint bank accounts, and with my financial planning and business advice. Community property laws are very clear about assets acquired during marriage. The weight of 15 years of condescension, of being treated like hired help at family gatherings, of watching them whisper about my motives, while I supported their golden boy through every challenge, it all crystallized into this moment. Marcus was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably texting his own lawyer. This is insane, Catherine. You can't seriously think you can steal Robert's life's work from his family. Steal? I laughed, and it came out sharper than I intended. Marcus, I didn't steal anything. I helped build it. Where were you when Robert was working 18-hour days and surviving on coffee and determination? Where were you when he needed a business loan and the banks kept turning him down? Where were you when he was so stressed about the Henderson contract that he couldn't sleep for weeks? The answer, of course, was that Marcus had been enjoying his trust fund while criticizing every decision Robert made. Jennifer had been shopping with Robert's money while questioning why he'd married beneath himself, and Sarah had been living off her uncle's generosity while barely maintaining a C average in high school. I was there, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I was there for all of it, I was the one who suggested the Henderson marketing strategy that saved that contract. I was the one who reorganized his accounting system that revealed the embezzlement in his bookkeeping department. I was the one who negotiated the lease terms on the new factory that saved him $300,000 a year. Mr. Hutchinson cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should continue with the reading of the prenuptial agreement? There are several more relevant sections. The conference room felt smaller now, the air thick with tension and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with nervous sweat. Marcus had gone from confident to desperate in the span of 10 minutes, his fingers drumming against the mahogany table like a man calculating how quickly his world was crumbling. Section 15, Mr. Hutchinson continued, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, establishes Mrs. Harrison's role as co-contributor to the Harrison Electronics enterprise, specifically noting her financial expertise and strategic planning contributions during the period from 2008 to 2023. Jennifer's laugh came out forced and brittle. Strategic planning? Catherine, you work at a library. You stamp books and organize shelves. Let's not pretend you built a multi-million-dollar business. That did it. 15 years of swallowing their insults, of smiling politely while they diminished my contributions, of watching them treat me like I was lucky to be included in their golden circle, it all came flooding out. You want to know about strategic planning, Jennifer? I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked downtown Portland. The city stretched out below us, gray and moody under the October sky. Let me tell you about the night in 2015, when Robert came home ready to declare bankruptcy. Marcus scoffed. That never happened. Harrison Electronics has always been profitable. Has it? I turned back to face them, and for the first time since Robert's death, I felt truly in control. Mr. Hutchinson, would you mind reading Section 23 of the Prenup? The part about financial records and documentation. The lawyer's eyebrows raised slightly as he flipped through the pages. Section 23 grants Mrs. Harrison full access to all business records, financial statements, and corporate documentation of Harrison Electronics in perpetuity as recognition of her role as financial advisor and strategic partner. The color drained from Marcus's face. He knew exactly what that meant. I'd had access to every dirty little secret of Harrison Electronics for 15 years. Every cooked book, every tax shortcut, every questionable business practice that had helped build their family fortune. You see, I said, returning to my seat with renewed confidence, I didn't just help Robert build the business. I helped him save it, multiple times. The 2015 crisis that nearly destroyed everything? That was because your brother Marcus had been skimming money from the company accounts to fund his gambling addiction. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah gasped, looking between her father and me with growing horror. Jennifer's perfectly composed mask finally cracked completely. That's a lie, Marcus sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. You can't prove any of that. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. Actually, I can. I have 15 years of documented conversations, financial records, and business correspondence, including the email thread from 2015 where Robert begged you to get help for your problem before it destroyed the company. The truth was ugly and complicated. Robert had been covering for his brother for years, using company profits to pay off Marcus's debts to some very dangerous people. It was my idea to structure it as a loan rather than a gift. My financial planning that had kept the company afloat during Marcus's worst period, and my research that had found the debt consolidation strategy that eventually saved them all. And the Henderson contract? I continued, feeling the momentum building. The one that saved the company in 2018? Marcus, do you remember what your contribution was to that negotiation? His silence was answer enough. Jennifer tried to step in, her voice shrill with panic. This is all speculation, Catherine. You're just trying to what? Get what I'm legally entitled to? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jennifer, let me ask you something. In 15 years of marriage, how many family dinners did you invite me to plan? How many holiday celebrations did you ask for my input on? How many times did you treat me like an actual member of this family instead of some unfortunate charity case Robert had saddled himself with? The answer was 0, and we all knew it. Mr. Hutchinson cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should discuss the practical implications of the prenuptial agreement. Mrs. Harrison, The document grants you significant rights regarding the business assets. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settling over me. Yes, it does. You see, Robert's father was a very thorough man. He knew exactly what kind of people his family were, and he wanted to make sure I'd be protected if anything happened to Robert. The old man's words came back to me clearly now. That conversation we'd had just weeks before he passed away. Catherine, my dear, I've watched how they treat you, how they act like you're not good enough for our family. But I see what you do for my son. I see how you've made him better, stronger, more focused. I won't let them destroy you if something happens to him. The prenup, I continued, doesn't just protect me from being disinherited. It recognizes my contributions to the business and grants me voting control over any major business decisions, including the sale or transfer of company assets. Marcus went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that Harrison Electronics can't be transferred to you without my signature. And frankly, after 15 years of watching you treat me like garbage while spending money I helped earn, I'm not feeling particularly generous. The room erupted. Jennifer started yelling about family loyalty. Sarah burst into tears about her college fund. Marcus threatened to contest everything in court. But through it all, Mr. Hutchinson sat quietly, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. They hadn't read the fine print. There's one more section, I said, my voice cutting through their protests. Mr. Hutchinson, would you read section 31, the part about hostile challenges to the agreement? The lawyer's slight smile told me everything I needed to know. Section 31 states that any attempt to challenge this prenuptial agreement in court will result in the challenging party forfeiting all claims to Harrison Electronics assets and facing personal liability for legal fees and punitive damages. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at the prenuptial agreement like it was written in a foreign language, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked dangerously close to panic. The confident man who'd walked into this office an hour ago, ready to claim his inheritance, had been replaced by someone who was rapidly calculating just how much trouble he was in. This is impossible, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Dad would never have, he wouldn't have cut us out like this. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine sympathy for Robert's family. But it was tempered by the memory of every slight, every dismissive comment, every time they'd made me feel like an interloper in my own marriage. Your father didn't cut you out, Marcus, I said gently. He protected me. There's a difference. Mr. Hutchinson was organizing his papers with the efficiency of a man who'd seen this drama play out countless times. Mrs. Harrison, given the circumstances, what are your intentions regarding the business? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the moment I discovered Robert's betrayal in his will. For 3 days, I'd been wrestling with anger, hurt, and a desire for revenge that scared me with its intensity. But sitting here now, watching Robert's family face the consequences of 15 years of treating me like I didn't matter, I realized something. I didn't want to become like them. I want to make something clear to all of you, I said, looking around the table. I never wanted Robert's money. I never married him for his wealth or his family's status. I married him because I loved him, despite the fact that his family made it clear I'd never be good enough. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. Then why are you doing this to us? The question hung in the air, and I could hear the genuine confusion in her voice. She was young, probably too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships and family dynamics, but she was old enough to have participated in the exclusion, old enough to have echoed her parents' dismissive attitudes toward me. Sarah, I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply exercising the rights that Robert's grandfather, your great-grandfather, insisted I have. I paused, letting that sink in. He saw what was happening. He saw how his family treated the woman his son loved, and he made sure I'd be protected. Jennifer leaned forward, her desperation making her voice sharp. What do you want, Catherine? Money? Fine. We can work something out. But you can't seriously think you can just take over Robert's business. Take over? I almost laughed. Jennifer, I've been running the financial side of Harrison Electronics for 8 years. Robert may have been the face of the company, but I was the one keeping the books, managing the cash flow, and planning the strategic expansions. It was true, though Robert had never acknowledged it publicly. He'd started bringing me into business meetings around 2015, initially as a silent observer. But gradually, as clients and partners began to recognize my contributions, I'd become an integral part of the operation. The Henderson contract, the expansion into the Seattle market, the acquisition of Sterling Components, all had my fingerprints on them. "You want to know what I want?" I continued, feeling the power of the moment. "I want recognition. I want acknowledgement that for 15 years, I contributed to this family's success while being treated like hired help. I want an apology for every time you made me feel small, insignificant, unworthy." Marcus finally found his voice again. "And if we give you that? If we apologize, what then?" I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was still thinking like a businessman, looking for the angle, the deal that would get him what he wanted. It was so typically Harrison. Everything was a transaction. Everything had a price. "Then we figure out how to move forward," I said simply. "But it starts with honesty, all of it. The gambling debts, the money transfers, the tax issues I've been quietly fixing for years. Everything." The room went very quiet. Mr. Hutchinson looked up from his papers with obvious interest. This was clearly news to him, and as the estate lawyer, he had obligations that went beyond just reading documents. "What tax issues?" he asked carefully. Marcus shot me a look of pure panic, but I was past the point of protecting him from the consequences of his choices. "Mr. Hutchinson, I think you'll find that Harrison Electronics' tax filings for the past 5 years contain some irregularities. Nothing criminal, but certainly aggressive interpretations of business expense deductions." Jennifer had gone pale. "Catherine, you can't be serious about what? About telling the truth?" I stood up again, needing to move, to channel the energy that was building inside me. "I've spent 15 years covering for this family's mistakes, smoothing over their problems, making excuses for their behavior. I'm done." The weight of those years hit me all at once. All the times I'd smiled and nodded when Marcus made jokes about working wives. All the family photos I'd been conveniently left out of. All the business successes where Robert took full credit while I remained invisible in the background. "But here's what I'm willing to do," I said, turning back to face them. "I'm willing to work with you. The prenup gives me control, yes, but it doesn't require me to exercise it vindictively. We can restructure the business as equal partners. We can set up a proper succession plan that takes care of everyone. We can even establish a college fund for Sarah that doesn't depend on her uncle's generosity." Marcus looked suspicious. "What's the catch?" "No catch, just conditions." I returned to my seat, feeling more confident than I had in years. "First, I want a formal role in the company. Chief Financial Officer with appropriate compensation and recognition. Second, I want Marcus to enter a rehabilitation program for his gambling addiction and submit to regular financial audits. Third, I want a public acknowledgement of my contributions to the business over the past 15 years. The terms were reasonable, probably more generous than they deserved, but I wasn't interested in destroying Robert's legacy or leaving his family destitute. I just wanted what I'd been denied for 15 years. Respect. Sarah looked at her father with new eyes. "Dad, is it true? About the gambling?" Marcus's shoulders sagged in defeat. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely ashamed. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's true." The admission seemed to deflate the last of Marcus's bravado. He sat back in his chair, looking older than his 58 years, the weight of his secrets finally visible on his face. Jennifer reached over and took his hand, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely vulnerable instead of calculating. "How bad is it?" she asked softly. Marcus closed his eyes. "Bad enough that without Robert's help over the years, we would have lost everything. The house, Sarah's private school, your art gallery, all of it." He looked at his daughter, whose college fund he'd potentially jeopardized. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I never meant for it to get so out of control." Mr. Hutchinson cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps this would be a good time to discuss next steps. Mrs. Harrison, your proposal seems quite reasonable under the circumstances." I looked around the table at Robert's family, my family, despite how they'd treated me. Sarah was crying quietly, probably processing the fact that her perfect family had been built on lies and gambling debts. Jennifer was staring at her husband like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, and Marcus looked like a man who'd finally been caught after years of running. "There's something else you should know," I said quietly. something Robert never told any of you." They all looked up, and I could see the fear in their eyes. After 15 years of secrets, they weren't sure what other bombs might be waiting to explode. The reason Robert left me so little in his will wasn't because he didn't love me. It was because he knew about the prenup. He knew I'd be taken care of regardless of what his will said. I paused, letting that sink in. "He was trying to protect you from yourselves." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "Robert knew about your gambling, Marcus. He knew you'd expect to inherit the business, and he knew you'd probably destroy it within 5 years. The will was his way of forcing this conversation, of making sure the prenup came to light so I could step in and save the company from your addiction." It was a charitable interpretation of Robert's actions, and honestly, I wasn't entirely sure it was true. Robert had always been proud and controlling, and leaving me so little might have been his final attempt to assert dominance even from the grave. But it was the interpretation that allowed his family to maintain some dignity. And after 15 years of marriage, I'd learned that sometimes the kindest truth is the one that preserves everyone's ability to move forward. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice small and uncertain. I looked at this young woman who'd inherited her family's sense of entitlement, but hadn't yet developed their cruelty. There was still hope for her, still time for her to become someone better than the adults who'd raised her. "Now we rebuild," I said simply. "Your father gets help for his addiction. Your mother learns to see me as a partner rather than an interloper. You go to college on a scholarship I'm going to establish in your grandfather's name, and we all figure out how to run Harrison Electronics together." Mr. Hutchinson was taking notes, probably already drafting the paperwork that would formalize our new arrangement. "Mrs. Harrison, I have to say, your approach to this situation has been remarkably gracious. I thought about Robert, about the man I'd loved despite his flaws and his family's treatment of me. He'd never been deliberately cruel, just thoughtless in the way that privileged people often are. He'd loved me in his way, but he'd never fully understood what it cost me to be constantly dismissed and diminished by the people who mattered most to him. Robert's father once told me that the measure of a person isn't how they treat those who can help them, but how they treat those who can't," I said. "For 15 years, I couldn't help myself against your dismissal and condescension. But now I can, and how I choose to use that power will define who I really am." Marcus looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "Catherine, we owe you an apology. Multiple apologies. I don't know if we can ever make up for how we've treated you." "You can start by treating me like family," I said simply. "Like someone who belongs here, who has value beyond what I can contribute to your comfort." Jennifer nodded slowly. I think we can do that." As we prepared to leave the conference room, Mr. Hutchinson handed me a copy of all the documents. "Mrs. Harrison, if you don't mind me saying, your late husband's father would be very proud of how you've handled this situation." Walking out of that law office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sense that I finally belonged somewhere. Not because I'd married into it or earned it through years of quiet suffering, but because I'd stood up for myself and demanded the respect I deserved. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of winter and new beginnings. Marcus, Jennifer, and Sarah walked beside me toward the parking garage, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt like we might actually become the family Robert had always claimed we were. 6 months later, Harrison Electronics reported its most profitable quarter in company history. Marcus had been in treatment for 4 months and was working his way back into the business under careful supervision. Sarah had started her freshman year at Portland State on the Robert Harrison Memorial Scholarship, and Jennifer had actually invited me to plan the family's Christmas dinner. But the real victory wasn't the money or the business success, or even the grudging acceptance from Robert's family. The real victory was the day I looked in the mirror and saw someone who had finally learned to value herself enough to demand that others do the same. And you know what? Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply refusing to accept less than you deserve and having the courage to fight for your own worth. What would you have done in my place? Would you have been as forgiving as I was? Or would you have taken everything and walked away? If stories like this one grab your attention and make you think, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you thought about Catherine's choice. I read every single comment.